Are we all set then?
I think we're all set.
All right. Well, it is 5:30 and this is Darren Portney. I'm filling in for Mr. Slavish tonight. So that's one of the wonderful perks of being vice chair, I guess. So I get to run the meeting. So we'll call the meeting to order. It is 5:30. The first, we have attendance. Abby, you have everybody here?
Yes, I have Stewart, Fortney, Bergenthal, Roden, Adams, and Day all present.
Okay, terrific. The beautiful thing of having a Zoom meeting, everybody's can see. All right, the first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. Does anybody have any comments, edits? Anything?
I can't remember that long ago.
And I wasn't there.
Well, that's the beauty of the minutes. So anybody have any edits to the minutes? All right, hearing none. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve.
So Ben, motion. Do we have a second?
Seconded,
Who is that? I don't have. Is that
Stewart, Christina Stewart.
Christina. All right, thank you. Okay, do we need to call a motion to that? Motion to approve? All in favor by saying aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the minutes from June are approved. Let's keep moving along here. So we have 4 agenda items. First one is update on the community development block grant, the CDBG Disaster Recovery Funding Award. Abby.
Yes, so unfortunately, I have some bad news to report about the CDBG Disaster Recovery Grant. So this was an initiative of the Workforce Housing Committee. The committee applied for and received $3 million in funding to support construction of 50 units of multifamily housing. We did a request for proposals. We received 2 proposals. Initially, the committee recommended the Madison Development Corporation proposal, but that developer was unable to secure the land for the project. So then the committee went back and recommended the other proposal, which was the 3810 development, JT Klein's project within the Tribeca development. And I have been working with the DOA and the applicant for months now on trying to meet the criteria of the grant. And unfortunately, the DOA basically in a back and forth with Jacob that centered around 2 key issues. Jacob has determined that the grant will not meet his needs for his project. And also the DOA has determined that if we wanted to proceed with his project, we would need to reapply for the grant, the next round of grant funding that they have released. So there are 2 primary issues. The first one is that when this is applied to a tax credit project, a LIHTC Section 42 project, it's considered taxable income. So that's because the way that the DOA set up the program is as a grant rather than a loan. It's different when you're bringing in home funds and other types of funding that are also run through the DOA, but in this case, they very clearly stated that it has to be a grant. So the problem with that is it's taxable income, which means that the value of the grant to Jacob went from 3 million to about 1.6 million. The second major problem with it is that, which we talked about during the RFP process, is that the grant requires Davis-Bacon wage rates, which adds 14 to 15% overall to construction costs for a project. But in Jacob's case, he had planned to use the grant for land acquisition. And we had gone pretty far down the path with the DOA that we thought that that was going to be an acceptable use of the funds, which wouldn't require Davis-Bacon to apply to the whole project. However, there is an entity that already owns the land that is 1% owned by JT Klein, and I'm getting the 1% from him. I don't have any verification of who makes up that LLC that owns the land now. But at any rate, the DOA has made a determination that if any percentage of the land is already owned by JT Klein, then it wouldn't be an eligible use of the funds. So you can't use the funds for land acquisition, and there aren't any other soft costs that he could apply the funds to that would not kick in the Davis-Bacon wages. And so basically what Jacob and his team have decided is that if they accepted the funds, it wouldn't really be worth anything to them at this point, because it would add, with the taxable income issue, that takes the benefit of the project down to about 1.6 million. And because the project is however many millions of dollars, if you apply the 15% Davis-Bacon requirements, and then in addition, all the additional reporting requirements that are caused by this source of funding, that it really wouldn't be financially beneficial for him to accept the funds. So that's the bad news on that grant. There are 2 other communities that are using the funds. They are using them for housing projects that do not have an incentive through the WIDA tax credit program. I don't know how far along they are with their programs. We actually had to do an open records request with the state to even find out the other 2 communities that received an award. And it seems like, having sat through their 4-hour training session now on the grant and sunk quite a bit of time into working with the DOA, that if we are going to apply for a second round of funding for another project, we would need to go through another competitive process. But also I would recommend that if we do decide to go that route, that we would allocate some of the funding that we would receive toward compliance and hire an outside agency to ensure that we're complying with the requirements of the grant, because it's pretty cumbersome.
So just to be clear, so basically the deal kind of fell apart as the details of working with JT Klein and the DOA were basically being worked through, not because of any process type of changes that we had by first selecting Madison Development Corp, then going to JT Klein. That had nothing to do with it. It was just once we awarded to JT Klein and we're working through the details, that's when the sticking points were discovered or arose.
Yeah, that's correct. It had nothing to do with switching from MDC to JT Klein. In fact, I mean, the DOA staff, we had 10 meetings with their staff, trying to get to a point where we could, get a project that they would approve, but that would also keep the benefit of the grant toward the applicant. And it came to a point a couple weeks ago where they gave us a deadline of Thursday to present to them a project that met all of their requirements, and we did meet their deadline. And then we didn't hear anything until the following Monday, and they reached out and said that they felt that the project had changed too many times, and at this point it needed to be a new application. So many of the changes that were being requested by Jacob were to respond to concerns that had been raised by the DOA. So I definitely don't want to make it seem like this was all in the developer's court, because many of the changes were directly in response to how they wanted, how I felt that they wanted the program to be set up. And so we were kind of meeting with them, making changes, going back. We spent a lot of time working on it. And yeah, unfortunately, they told us at this point we would need to apply for a second round. They did say that if we decided to go for a second round of funding, that we would likely receive the funds, and that if we were to award the funds to 3810 and Jacob Klein, we wouldn't need to go through another competitive process. But Jacob has basically said, he took about a week after we learned that from the DOA to think about it and meet with Lutheran Social Services, his partner on the project, and their board. And they basically said, no, we don't even want to proceed at this point. Now, we do have another nonprofit housing developer that has reached out and has expressed interest in going for a second round. But again, it wouldn't be necessarily allocated to this entity if we were to do the second round of funding. The application deadline is next month, so we would have a little bit of time, but we would still have to go through another competitive process. And like I said, we would need to use some of that 3 million to hire an outside entity to make sure we're complying with the requirements. Because their manual is about 160 pages long, just on like the reporting requirements, and it's pretty complicated. And just having worked with them enough now, I would be very nervous having that rest just on city staff with all of our other.
Right. It sounds pretty complex, but historically, from your experience, is it typically the municipality that needs to have that, or the developer also has that degree of sophistication with the program, or kind of a combo? But
Well, ultimately, the municipality is basically the middle person on the grant, or the middle
Right.
entity, because we don't have access to all of the pay stubs, for example, that the developer is paying all their subcontractors and all the pricing. So we have to get that from them, but then we have to put it into the format and report it to the DOA to meet their requirements. Ultimately, it's the municipality that's on the hook for meeting the requirements. We would probably have an agreement, and in fact, we did draft one with JT Klein that would say, if there were any, if there were some compliance issues with the grant, that the city would basically not be awarding the funds to the developer, so that we would be protected. I mean, our attorneys would absolutely require that we would be protected. The city would not pay $3 million unless we got the funds from the DOA. They would absolutely require that. But I just think that it's very complicated. So I just think, like, knowing everything else that's on our plates right now, and I mean, we've done a lot of grants and we've had a lot of compliance that we can do in-house, but this one, now understanding the whole scope of it, I think we would probably want to contract it out.
sounds fair.
So was,
A quick question is did you say the grant became taxable because he was going for tax credits?
Yes.
Okay,
And that would be the case even if it were a nonprofit developer. If they were getting the tax credits, it would be taxable income. But if it's a development that is not getting tax credits, it's possible that it would not be taxable income. I don't know the details of that.
yeah, that's a big difference.
Yeah, for sure.
JT Klein unloading their 1% of the current property first was not an option, or not appealing?
I don't know if we would have been able to, I'm not sure if it would have satisfied the concerns that the DOA had.
Okay.
I mean, we kind of got to a point where they weren't really willing to budge on anything
Mhm.
else. I mean, we were trying to come up with solutions. We had a lot of meetings, but they were like, this is a done deal. It's not going to work, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think the Davis Bacon piece has always been a part of it, so that's not a big surprise, but the taxability of the grant seems like that's a big issue.
Yeah, and I did talk with a local housing expert, and that person told me that this program was set up very unfavorably, and that had they consulted with the other bureau within the DOA that manages housing grants, they would have set it up in an entirely different way that would have been a lot more user-friendly for a developer.
Well, it sounds like you've learned way more than you probably ever wanted to know about all that, and sounds like kind of a thankless exercise. So thank you for going through all those weeds with the developer and making the effort.
And there is one good thing. We sunk a lot of staff time into this, but it's not wasted time, because many of the things that the city put into place to make us eligible to apply for this funding source are also requirements for the neighborhood investment grant, which is due next month. And that's really major grant that focuses on equity projects, improving neighborhoods, capital infrastructure projects, and the minimum award for that grant is $1 million. The maximum is 15 million. And our staff is working on ideas and putting together information to try to apply for that. And I think that that grant actually has the same compliance requirements as well. But we would have several staff members that would be working on that project if we were able to get funding.
Okay,
Abby,
so-
thanks for, thanks for all the work that you've done on that. I know it's been extraordinary amount of time and effort with all the meetings too. We really should be thankful for everything that you have led in this team effort.
Well, I just feel badly that it didn't work out better, so. But thank you.
But like you said, you'll have data for future rounds.
Yep.
Okay, and then just to close out this one, the second round, then just because of the timing and the complexity is something that we don't, that we're just going to pass on. And
Well, there is one developer that has actively been reaching out and inquiring about it. And I don't know, I mean, it would be another affordable housing developer. I do think that if we took another grant to the city council, that they would want to focus on owner occupied housing, just given some of the comments that we heard last time when we took the grant forward, because we were focusing on 50 multifamily renter occupied households, and they made a push at that time. And I think if we were going to go for another round, that would definitely come up in the discussion. I think it would be a real limiting factor because right now we don't have any land available for single family. And so if we were going to go owner occupied, like condominium, multifamily housing, then we would bump up against that financing issue where developers aren't able to secure loans that are backed by the two primary mortgage entities because of the pre-sale requirements with condos. And I don't understand all the details of that, but it's been a barrier basically since before the Great Recession. There haven't been any condos that are getting developed because of it, at least in Middleton.
okay, any other comments or questions for Abby with respect to agenda item number 1?
Thanks for all the hard work.
Yeah, thank you, Abby.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's keep the meeting moving. Let's move on to agenda item number 2, which is concept review for the revised TID number 5 assistance. JT Klein over in phase 1, Tribeca.
Yes, this is on the city council and the finance committee agenda for tomorrow night. And it's for the same project, 3810, and it's a developer finance TIF request. It's pretty similar to what had previously been approved. So this is like the 4th iteration of the 3810 development proposal. And previously he had gotten approval for a TIF incentive that was in the amount of 2.8 million. It was for both buildings together that he's planning for the 3810 development. And it was at 80% of the total increment that was being generated by the project. He is now coming forward and he's requesting 90% of the tax increment that's being generated. But his project is half the total. So he would likely come back with another TIF request for phase 2. But at this point, he just wants to focus on getting approval for the 45 units that he wants to construct in phase 1. From a land use standpoint, we support having the 2 smaller buildings rather than the 1 large building. I think we have had quite a few projects come on the market recently that are like 125 units in 1 building. And so I think having like a little different option here is a positive. However, after reviewing his pro forma with our finance director, our finance director is the primary staff person who handles that, and he works with our city assessor. We are recommending only 80% in line with what was previously approved. And so we included this on the finance and council agenda at 80%. And the developer, well, actually we'd included it on the finance committee only at 80%, and the developer reached out and said, this is basically what was previously approved. So would you mind also putting me on the council agenda so I can get my approvals lined up sooner? And so we did take that step, since it was, our staff recommendation was right in line with what had previously been approved. So I don't think the developer is going to push back on our staff recommendation to go with the lower split. So anyway, this is basically just kind of an update because it's pretty similar overall to what was previously approved. The biggest change would be that he's requesting an incentive for the smaller building, and then he would bring back another request in the future for the larger building. But in terms of like the split, it's pretty similar.
Have you, just curious, have we done much 90% approval, or has it been mostly 80%?
There have been approvals that have gone up to 100%. So for example, the Middleton Center project in downtown, that was 100% of the TIF increment because they had so many costs related to demolition and soil remediation. There was environmental contamination. So there were a lot of extraordinary costs on that project, and also a shorter payback period because that TIF closes in 2030 versus this one that closes in 2036. So if there are significant extraordinary costs, sometimes the city has gone up to 100% of the increment. There are also lots of projects within the TIF district that don't get any support from TIF. Like for example, the Common Ground redevelopment on Branch and Century, that's a market rate housing project, a redevelopment, and that's not getting any TIF assistance. And then there are some that get 25%, like the Town Place Suites Hotel project. That was all related to soil remediation costs. And I think they got 25% of the increment. So it really is on a case-by-case basis, but using our TIF policy that the city has approved to make sure that it meets all the criteria, and then a detailed financial review by our finance director.
Thanks.
So Abby, is there any action then on this second from the committee?
I think it's up to you. I mean, if you wanted to recommend concept approval for, you know, the 1.2 million at the level of 80% versus 90%, you could, or you wouldn't necessarily even have to, since this was previously also reviewed by Workforce Housing.
So you were saying, Abby, that even though this packet is all about 80%, that they're going to be asking for 90 tomorrow?
Well, they were asking for 90. That is still their current request. That's what we have an application for, but our
Okay.
staff recommendation is for 80. And I don't think we're going to get pushback from the developer, because just based on the phone call where he asked, could it also go to council, since we're only recommending 80% anyway. I could be wrong about that. He could show up at the finance committee or the council meeting and be really upset with our staff recommendation and fight hard for the 90%. Maybe that's what he intends to do, but I don't think that that's his plan. I think he's comfortable with the staff recommendation. And he had previously requested 90 also on some of his previous approvals, and the council didn't support that level of assistance.
Okay, does the committee feel we need to make a recommendation, or that we just not go there as part of tonight's meeting?
I mean, if we already approved it in the past, is it helpful for the council to have a fresh approval, or?
It could be, yeah. I mean, they may ask in their meeting, they may say, did the Workforce Housing Committee make a recommendation? And I would either say, this is pretty much in line with the previous recommendation that they made, or I would say, You know, they met yesterday and this is their recommendation.
I would be okay offering a fresh recommendation. If somebody wants to make a motion, that would be fine. If not, that's fine too.
So are we recommending the project per se or the amount of the TIF? What are we recommending?
Well, our staff recommendation is developer finance TIF assistance at the level of 1.2 million with 80% of the increment applied to the project. Their request is developer finance assistance at the level of 1.37 million with 90% of the increment going to support the project.
Right, but I guess we typically don't, like as our committee, we don't get involved in the calculation of the TIF award or the incentive. And we've, I think, voted in support of the project.
Oh, right, yeah. You could
Because
do
I'm
that.
not sure what we're going to do again now.
Yeah, and I didn't include any of the confidential, like financial information in your packet, and I didn't schedule a closed session meeting, but there is a closed session at the finance committee meeting tomorrow night. So if the finance committee decides to go into the financial details of the project, they can do that in a closed session without those documents being public.
So this committee has already offered support for the project. We've gone on record. It's just a matter of whether or not we're going to get in the weeds with supporting basically the first sentence of that second paragraph. Is what TIF staff recommends.
Yep.
If we want a fresh approval, we could have a motion that says something like Workforce Housing Committee continues to support the proposed development, including use of TIF funds in order to increase the number of workforce housing units in the city.
Is that a motion? Is that a motion, Betsy? It sounds like a motion. Very well worded. Thank you.
That sounds like a
That was good,
one.
Betsy.
Well, thank you. Then that's what I move.
I'll second that.
All right, we have a second. Who was that? Was that Ben?
It was
or
Rob.
Sam? Rob,
It was Rob.
sorry. All right, we have a motion and a second. Those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, the motion passes. Thank you, Betsy, for clarifying. All right. Moving along, Finance Committee proposed American Rescue Plan Act projects, agenda item number 3.
And I know Mike Davis is on the call here, but I didn't chat with him about this in advance. Mike has kind of been our lead staff member putting together the ARPA funding proposals. And so if he would like to go over these, I will defer to him.
Abby, do you have a list of them that you could put up on the screen just so to make sure I don't forget?
Yes, and I was thinking that we would primarily just focus on the ones that had a housing
Right.
component. So 1 through 3 plus, let's see, 7. Can you see
What's number
those?
7?
7 is the NOAA, energy efficiency and solar.
Oh,
and
I see.
NOAA
You got
housing.
them up on the screen. I'm
Yep.
sorry, I can't with my phone. It's a little bit harder to see. Okay, yeah, so these have all been approved. The ones that Abby mentioned, 1 through 3, and number 7 by the city council for our budget for 2022. I think they want to make, excuse me. I think the council wants to make 3 separate allocations each year, depending upon how the projects go. But their initial commitment is for supporting mom by $30,000 a year. And if I've got the number right, in that first one,
$20,000.
$20,000 a year for their housing support services, food security program and stability. And then for the senior center, and these are both designed to be costs that are beyond what Dane County's ARPA assistance is going toward on housing assistance. So for the seniors, moving costs and deposits in particular for low income seniors. And then on the third item, it'll take a little bit more work on our part, but the concept is to work with an entity. Currently, that's the school that Kaleem Care has founded and another organization, Abby, you remember the name of it, that is working on
The school is
grants.
One City.
One City. And the realtor's name,
Sarah Alvarado.
Sarah Alvarado, is working on grants for people of color to live in areas that they might not otherwise be able to afford to live. And so this concept was to provide assistance of up to $15,000 per household for Middleton to do that same thing, should there be somebody from Middleton in that program interested in buying a house in Middleton. Now, whether $15,000 would go far enough would be another question altogether. So that's going to take a little bit of work on our part. Number 7 is a program that is sponsored by Sustain Dane and Elevate, and it's called the NOAA program, Naturally Occurring Affordable Housing. And so it dovetails 2 major city priorities, one being sustainability, the other being affordable housing, and providing grants to low-income households, probably mostly apartments, that would benefit from energy efficiency improvements for their households. So there's going to need to be an agreement with the property owner, RE landlord in that case, but it is a program that is countywide and I think has a great deal of promise. And so there's a not-for-profit entity that is organizing that, and Kelly Hilliard, our sustainability coordinator, is working directly with them for $150,000 per year, again, for that sustainability combined with affordable housing. So just want to give you guys an update on what we're doing to try to advance with the American Rescue Plan funds many initiatives that are near and dear to the hearts of those of us who've been working on affordable housing for a long time.
And one thing that I should have explained or put into the packet is that this risk level here that's listed, this is based on our providing a list of potential projects to the company that handles our auditing for financial auditing for the city, and asking them to assess whether or not these programs fit within the ARPA criteria, because some of the language that's included in the act is kind of vague. So many of the programs that are kind of equity initiatives are falling under the category of assisting people who were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And so we wanted to get their take on whether these programs would be eligible or not. And they gave a high risk assessment to a couple of projects which weren't funded. They said that they're not eligible. But all of the projects that fell under the equity and the housing initiatives were all low risk category.
Except for our diversity education and inclusion
Training. Oh, yeah.
training, that which would have been for city employees. And so the auditor said that that's not sufficiently helping people adversely affected by the pandemic, or not directly.
Yep.
Mike, thanks. So you mentioned on number 3, the grants for people of color, that one of the things we're looking at is whether the 15,000 be impactful, sufficiently impactful. So are the numbers still being worked, or is this still changing, or is this set at this point?
Well, right now the dollar amount is set, but it can be improved or cut, as the case may be, depending upon new factors that come up. So there is about $150,000 that the council is maintaining in reserve that could be added to a project,
Okay,
depending upon how well it works and our success with the project. So it gives council a little bit of leeway as we go and not having everything fully allocated.
makes sense.
Other
And
questions or
Mike, the
comments?
funds have to be spent by the end of 2024, correct?
Yep, just remember it as by the end of the Biden administration, first administration.
Okay, like
So-
the previous one, is there action needed or required?
There's not action that's required, but I guess this is kind of a heads up because for number 3 and number 7, it's likely that we're gonna want involvement from the Workforce Housing Committee as we get the program set up and we kind of start to iron out the details and establish agreements. I think number 1 and 2 are pretty straightforward and they're kind of piggybacking on programs that have already been set up. But 3 and 7 will kind of be newer initiatives. So we'll probably want to bring back some thoughts for you to consider going forward.
If there's any action needed on one, I should disclose I'm on the board of directors at MOM. So I don't, like you said, I don't think anything would be coming back to us, but if so, I don't know if would be a conflict of interest or anything like that, but I'm just throwing that out there.
Does mom pay you money?
Not last time I checked.
So there's unlikely to be a conflict of interest, but there could be the perception of a conflict of interest, even though you don't make
Right.
money from being on the
No.
board for mom.
They don't
Right.
pay me, so, okay. All righty. Any other questions on this topic for Abby or Mike? All right, let's move on to agenda item number 4, strategic plan, consideration of affordable home ownership.
Abby, should I go ahead and give this some
Yes.
context?
Yeah, and I
Okay.
stopped share so we can see each other's faces bigger.
I think one of the interesting aspects of working with our elected officials on affordable housing is what I think is largely a myth, in that we're going to be able to affect the affordability of single-family homes in Middleton through government policy. Now, it's not completely a myth. There is a potential, but it takes a lot of moving parts to make single-family homes more affordable. Number 1 is our lack of supply. The growth area for the city was essentially cut in half last year when the county purchased one of the acre farms north of us to add to the conservancy. That's a good public policy benefit, but it simply did cut in half the growth area where we anticipated and planned for single family as well as mixed use development for the next 20 to 30 years. So number 2 is because of the success of the community and the school district, the attractiveness of living here, we have far greater demand than we have supply of homes. And that's driving assessed values higher and the vacancy rate lower. So part of our policy, a big part of our policy has been to incentivize multifamily home construction and development with TIF dollars. Those of you who read George Zenz know he believes that somehow the city is driving the prices up because of our policy to increase more multifamily housing. And he's simply wrong. It is far more the supply and demand factors that I mentioned that are having that effect. Now, there are government fees, and we have fees just like other communities do, impact fees, park fees, and those add some costs to the development of housing. But relative to other communities, not that much more, and in many cases less. So my argument is it's largely supply and demand. But one of the things I keep hearing from elected officials and now at the strategic plan level is that we need to provide more affordable single family housing. One possibility is that we get developers to build condominiums. And I know we've talked about this at the Workforce Housing Task Force and now committee for many years. We do have a developer, the Bell Farm developer, Catherine Slattery Moshkow, who is proposing 40 condominiums as part of her development. I'd love to see more condominiums as part of her development, but she has a very well thought out plan. And I think the planning staff and the planning commission have been very receptive of that plan because it does have a great deal of density, multifamily density, as well as condos and some single family homes as well. So I wanted to pose this to the committee to see if there's something I'm missing in thinking out about how we can affect more affordable home ownership in the community. The one that, as Betsy will know, we had a presentation from the at the Middleton Equity Connection of the Madison Committee Affordable Land, how's it go? Madison Community Land Trust for Affordable Housing. And but what that takes is somebody to buy land and give it or donate their land, give it to the land trust, which effectively holds down the value of the property so that when you build a new unit on that property, you have a common area maintenance cost for the land that can be controlled through that land trust. And then your sole costs then are for the construction or the renting of the constructed home. So that's one area. Condo development is another area. We do have a developer who started building condominiums back before the Great Recession, and that's the Whispering Pines subdivision, which is directly west of ETC on the hill overlooking ETC. They started building condos, and then the economy crashed. They were not able to continue selling condos, so they approached the city about incentivizing TIF for them in completing the rest of their development as multifamily. They did that with the prospect that those units eventually could be turned into condos because they built them in the same format as they built their condominiums in the previous iterations of their development. So we do have that possibility. We do have the Bell Farm condominiums. But to really effectively make a case for single family affordability, I don't know of any other means or methods that are available to us. So I'd be open to any comments and ideas that all of you have about that, because I do think that will probably be one of those things that everybody agrees to. The city should do more to promote affordability for single family homes in Middleton. And then I see it being thrust upon this committee to come up with ideas. So one way to do this is either that we come up with the ideas more than what I've mentioned, or we promote the ideas that I've mentioned and any other ideas that you have.
Well, there's a couple of the ideas are already on that list that we just went over, correct?
Right.
And yeah, I was going to bring up the community land trust idea that you brought up, but I'm wondering if we can look at it a little bit differently, because the question that you posed initially was how can city government affect the costs of home ownership? And you said, well, somebody has to donate the land. What if that somebody was the city using one of these grants to buy the land and give it to the community land trust?
Betsy, that's a lovely idea and one that I would support. When
But
we've been talking about no, there's no but. There will be a but not for me. We were talking about the community campus plan for the library, city hall, and senior center, and updates to those buildings, possibly unification of those buildings into a new one. That would mean that there'd be a city land available either for sale, or what I would propose is that we put that land in the land trust so that we could develop condominiums in the downtown area. And then have some price controls or income controls on who could purchase those to make sure that they're affordable to people at perhaps 60% or less of area median income, or at least 80% of area median income. So I think that would work, and it would work in a really high profile area of the community. But it depends on what we end up doing with the buildings. So it's a big question mark right now.
Like to Betsy's idea there, are there other parcels like not supposing this parcel, but just as an example, like the parcel that 3810 is acquiring for their building, right? Are there parcels like that could as well could be acquired for that type of land trust?
I'm sure there are, Ben, but the land values are so inflated right now
Yeah.
in Middleton, anywhere you go. And it's hard to find somebody who doesn't want to make money on their land when they sell it. Because if it was available, Habitat for Humanity subdivision would be another opportunity. For example, that remaining farm north of Middleton could include a Habitat for Humanity subdivision, or if the eventual developer was willing to do so. But that takes a pretty significant subsidy with Habitat. And one of the things that I think still is true under state law for TIF is that we can't incentivize homeownership or subdivision development. What we've been able to do is do that for multifamily housing as a commercial development.
I am not sure, but do you all recall from Olivia's presentation whether the community land trust will do like a 3 or 4 unit, or if they only do single family? Because one thought would be the location on Century Avenue, Mike, where the house was just taken down. I wonder if the city could potentially do something with that lot where we would buy it, but then we would need to donate it or substantially write down the cost to the land trust.
Yeah, that's an idea. A lot like that becomes available through an auction, although apparently nobody bought it, so the bank still has the property at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, the only real potential funding source we would have, like Betsy mentioned, would be the ARPA funds. So it would really require the council's willingness to reallocate some of the funds that have maybe already been allocated to other programs, like carving off a little bit from each to get to whatever the purchase price would be.
Mm-hmm.
So what was the funding source for Amherst when
It was
I know it
TIF.
was several years ago, but that was a really successful project and turned out really, really well.
Yeah, that was TIF funding.
2 questions. So the house that just came down, that was put up for auction already? That was quick, huh? And nobody bid on it?
I don't know if they didn't bid on it or if it wasn't acceptable to the
Oh.
bank because the bank apparently has $200,000 into that property.
Okay.
From what I've
And
been told.
that property is currently zoned single family or,
Yes, it's zoned R1.
okay,
So it would require a rezoning. But honestly, like for anyone to purchase it at the price point that the bank is likely to sell it at, there's no way someone could make it work for a single family home. It would have to, I mean, that's not our issue from a zoning standpoint. That's really the bank's issue because they own the property, but no one's gonna pay $200,000 to build a small single family home on Century Avenue.
But yeah, Abby, you raise a good point. For a property like that, that is auctioned, the city could conceivably go in there with, now we do have ARPA funds, so that's a possibility.
I mean, we're talking like a very small development though. I mean, we're talking like 3 or 4 units probably at most that you would be able to fit on that lot. And there's no opportunity for combining it with adjacent properties because the property to the west is a historic landmark. It's very well maintained and used by the VFW. And then the property to the north is a single family home as well.
It's 3 to 4 more than we have today.
What's that?
That's true.
It'd be 3 to 4 more units than we have today. right?
Yeah,
So
that's
it's
true.
progress.
I do think we're likely to run into neighborhood opposition there, which is always a concern when it gets to the plan commission and the council.
I think though, too, a 3 to 4 unit is substantially less density than what has already been approved at other locations along Century Avenue. So I would hope that even if there were neighborhood opposition, that it would be supported because that is not going to redevelop as a single family home. It's just not happening. I mean, it's really not the right place for single family housing either. That road carries 20,000 cars a day.
Yeah, a rich person might not want to develop that house on that busy corner for that very reason. Even if they could afford it. Because we've seen some of those in Middleton where they buy to tear it down and then rebuild. But that's probably a bit too busy for that kind of investment too. So that's an idea worth exploring though, no doubt about it.
yeah, that section has really transitioned quickly over there.
Well, and the other benefit that I could see on that property is that part of the costs associated with the property are city costs. And so if the city were willing to basically decide that, make a public policy decision that providing affordable housing on that property and not basically foregoing that 50,000 or whatever the amount is that is owed to the city, that would kind of, in my opinion, kind of give the city a leg up on the negotiations for the property, although we are talking about this in a public meeting now. But also another benefit is that that property is located in the city's historic Pheasant Branch district, which Mike and I were on a meeting this afternoon where we were talking about it. And we would like to see an enhanced design. And it doesn't even have to cost more. We just want the design for any new building there to fit within the criteria that has been established by the city for that district. Similarly to how Stagecoach Trails, kind of modified their apartment design to fit with the criteria. And so it would also give us a little bit of leverage for that too, if it were like an RFP or if the city were dedicating the land.
So that's a possibility though, because that would be a way for the city council to put into effect their value of having affordable single family home ownership. on that corner. Is it large enough, Abby, for a quad type of development that could be
We-
condominiums?
Yeah, we looked at it and we thought, you know, with the big caveat that it would require rezoning and the city staff doesn't get to approve whether or not properties get rezoned. But we thought that it would be able to accommodate a 3 to 4 unit.
So that might be something that we could take to the council and repackage some of the ARPA funds with perhaps that 45,000 that we had for we knew there were a lot of questions about it for people of color, along with the remaining funds that are in the ARPA allocation. That might be a possibility.
Abby, do you know who the bank is that has it? Which
Mike,
bank?
I don't know. Do you know, Mike, which bank it
I
is?
was told, and I don't remember. It's not one of the major banks from what I remember.
But I mean, if maybe it was a local bank, maybe they'd be willing to write down the loan a little bit for a CRA credit.
You know, that's what Capital Bank did when we were working on Amherst Road.
Yeah.
In that case, it was blight elimination. This case, it's not in the TIF, so it's not blight elimination.
So you think though, Rob, that they could get a community and they could get some sort of credit for their community reinvestment requirements if they wrote down the cost?
You know, I'm probably speaking way out of school on this, but I'm guessing if they had, you know, for whatever they have it on the books for and whatever their loan amount is, if they were willing to discount that, you'd have to talk to them, but maybe it would count for a CRA credit in some form. It's worth asking, but I'm
Yep.
not.
It
As
is
far
worth
as your-
asking.
Mhm.
Maybe the best next step, Mike, would be for our staff to just try to find out who the bank contact is and see if we could meet with them directly.
Sounds good.
And
I
could
do
we
think-
approach the bank as being a partner in this, that they could, if you will, if nothing else, market this? I mean, I work for a bank, much larger one, and, you know, the interest in having these type of projects to market is, these last couple of years is, you know, intensified incredibly, right?
That's good to know, Ben. Thank you.
Well, and we have such a substantial kind of stake in it at the city level that I don't know, I think it could be a good project.
All right, so we have at least one solid idea to work with there, in addition to the land trust throughout the community.
I'm just curious with all the development that's happening on Parmenter. Those obviously that's not workforce housing, I don't believe, but will that create enough supply that there might be more competition so that the price to rent would go down in some of the places that aren't brand new?
That's a good question. You know, I don't know, although I've heard anecdotally some philosophies about this, that there might be the prospect of millennials moving on from multifamily housing looking for home ownership. So that may have already started, but the question would be, is that going to be possible in Middleton? And condominiums would be the next natural step for millennials that are renting, perhaps spending as much on rent as they would on a mortgage, or maybe even more so in some cases. So if those buildings hit the supply for the long term, and they are talking about 800 to 900 units over the next 20 to 30 years. You know, that's not probably long-term a lot of supply. It sounds like it, but for a community of Middleton size, I don't know. Would we become more saturated with apartments at some point and thereby making them more affordable? That's hard to say. It's hard to imagine that the demand for housing is going to go down anytime soon, particularly with such a great school district that we have.
Well, and also like just overall the growth projections for the county and the region as a whole,
Yeah.
we're all continuing to grow. So even if we're adding hundreds and hundreds of more units, if we're just enabling new people to move into the district, it won't help with the supply issues. Some of the units on Parmenter Street are workforce housing. The Trata project, the 125 unit, the big building that's going up on the east side of Parmenter is
Yep.
Has 50 units of income restricted and affordable housing.
Do either of the staff people know? I was just looking at an aerial of the city and I came upon this piece of open land that I didn't know was there, just north of the Pheasant Lane Apartments and just south of Gino's and Quick Trip, east of between Branch and Amherst.
That's Abby's territory. She's a frequent buyer at Gino's.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's this house, 2627 Branch, and it may be the property behind that. I don't know, but it's kind of interesting little landlocked parcel.
I'm trying to find it right now on DCI map.
One of the interesting things that maybe while Abby's looking for that, maybe you all may be wondering is, does the city own land? And we really don't have any parcels there that are saleable that are all not already used as either conservancy or parks. Except for that downtown area that I mentioned with the redevelopment of our civic campus. What'd you find, Abby?
I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of land in that area that's environmental corridor because that's where the Pheasant Branch Creek corridor runs. And so there are some restrictions. I think that land is it's considered conservancy. I see what you're talking about now, the one that kind of juts up in between the two cul-de-sacs.
No,
No.
I just looked up on Access Dane, this 2627 Branch Street, and it does show that the land is in that property.
Yeah, so all just outlining like this area and then even including this big area here, this all is conservancy land and creek, part of the environmental corridor for the creek, which we're
Yeah.
actually
I'm looking
widening
on the other side of Branch Street.
the other
and it's all-
side.
It's right
Oh,
behind
this-
Quick Trip. Right behind
Yep.
Quick Trip.
Yep,
This
right
little
there.
landlocked piece,
Mm-hmm, yep.
Rouse, Canothie, Indus Investment. I think it might, well, let's see, is it these people? Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
some of it belongs to them.
So
Yeah.
they own this whole piece.
Okay.
Maybe they held on to this in case they ever wanted to expand.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
kind of what it looks like.
Or maybe it's just part of their green space requirements, but it's a
Mhm.
separate parcel. So that's interesting. Yeah, I don't know why that is back there like that.
Is that where the clinic is, or there's a medical clinic there?
I don't think this, does anybody remember what this building is?
I thought those were apartments.
Yeah, it's labeled Pheasant Lane Apartments on the Google.
Oh, okay. So it must just be green space. Yeah, Pheasant Lane, Rouse Management. Yep. Oh, here's the street view. Oh, you might not be able to see this because I think I only just shared that one tab. Hold on one second. So yeah, there's the street view. Pheasant Lane Apartments. So maybe it's just green space that their residents use or walk their dog out there. I don't know.
Okay, anything else on agenda item number 4? So is this a little homework for us, or we should maybe continue to give this?
I think it
item
is.
some thought?
I was hoping to get your creative juices working on this and see, because I think in the strategic plan, it's likely to be almost one of those throwaway things where everybody agrees that we should have more affordable single-family housing. But what's going to end up happening is that then it'll be referred to this committee. So you either want to be proactive on it or reactive in the future.
Well, maybe we can, do some Google searches or just keep our eyes and ears open. I mean, there's plenty of things out on like social media or LinkedIn or whatnot. Maybe we can start gathering ideas and sharing them as they come across.
I think that would be wonderful.
So I just sent you, Abby, a link. If we had a chat here, I would stick it in there, but we don't have one. A link to the Community Land Trust document that was put together by the Community Innovators Lab, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, but also one of the authors is the executive director of the Madison Land Trust, Olivia Williams.
Okay. I'm going to forward you an article that I just forwarded that out to the committee.
Oh, okay, cool.
So thank you for sharing that, Betsy. And I'm also going to forward an article about community land trusts that in Madison that our sustainability coordinator, Kelly Hilliard, sent to us on Sunday.
By the way, I didn't mention it, but I do think one policy item that Abby's working on and the planning staff is the accessory dwelling unit as part of a zoning rewrite. And I do think that that could help to address availability of housing. I suppose it's going to end up being one of those questions, would the person have to be related or not? And Abby, I don't know what you've been thinking on that, but if it's unrelated, that could certainly help on the overall affordable housing. If we have, say, 30 or 40 new accessory dwelling units pop up over the next few years.
Yeah, and the current thinking is it wouldn't need to be a related household member, but I think the big policy questions that the city is going to be facing on accessory dwelling units are whether we would allow the daisy chaining of utilities, or if they have to extend a separate lateral, which is going to add a lot of costs. And also if we're going to charge park fees and impact fees, because those add, $3,500 to $5,000 per unit. And I think if we require those two things, in my opinion, we aren't going to see any accessory dwelling units getting built.
I agree.
So those are going to be before the Workforce Housing Committee at some point for consideration, and we'll have to do some research on what other communities are doing.
I think the opposite side would be, if the apartments all go towards college students who are just temporarily poor. But, it's hard to control all of that in the marketplace. But you could see how that could be very attractive to a college student at the UW.
With the accessory dwelling units, say I put one up, right? Does the homeowner own the unit then, or can literally have someone else? Can they literally sell the unit, or does the homeowner retain ownership? So it wouldn't necessarily change single family ownership. It'd be more of a renting situation, right?
Yes, yeah, and
Right.
that's like really the key factor is that it has to be one single owner.
Right.
Because the separate dwelling unit is accessory to the primary dwelling unit. So it's not a duplex, even if they're attached and it's 2 units, it's not a duplex because a duplex could be divided and each side could be owned by a different owner, but this is one parcel and one owner.
Right. So it could help with affordable housing, but not additional single family ownership.
Correct. What it could help with is enabling people to stay in their homes longer because it provides a source of income. And in some cases, in other cities, they've had success with enabling like seniors to stay in their homes longer because they have a source of income. Or, yeah, I mean, it could maybe potentially help
Sure.
with that. I don't want to overpromise though, because to construct one is not going to be cheap in Middleton. And
Do you know, with those accessory buildings, does it have to be then owner occupied in order to then bring in the accessory building, or could you have rental on something
yet
like
to
that?
be determined, but that I know is going to be a key issue as well. Thanks for raising that. Because that I know, yeah, there is concern that it could get out of control with like short-term rentals, especially. So that's still being decided.
It seems like most of the opportunities are going to be these kind of small things, like the house you guys are talking about on Century Avenue. I'm going to have to take a look at that. But maybe the innovation that we have is some kind of policy for small opportunities. I don't know what that is, but just being as prepared as possible to, I don't know, provide financing or whatever it is to catch the smaller things as they come up.
That's a good way to put it. The lot is on the corner of Century and Old Creek Road. So it's just east of the VFW, red VFW Post building, pretty close to Middleton Hills neighborhood.
Sam, if you can't find it, you and I can walk down to the Stam House and I'll show you.
There you go. It's still
A
patio
work meeting.
season too, just
Right.
saying.
Yeah, it was almost like 80 degrees today. There's plenty of time left.
Yep.
No, I think that accessory building is actually intriguing. I own a single family rental home on Century and Donna, and it's a tremendously large lot. I mean, it's just huge. And there's a little shed back there, but there, if you want to see like an example of like, a transitioning kind of street where there's a single family home on a very, very large lot, there's a lot of opportunity on a property like that. And that was the reason why I asked if, currently it's a rental property, but, there's a lot of room on some of these lots that are really going underutilized. But, again, neighborhood and opposition potentially, and, it's just going to involve change. But maybe that's how we provide it. It's really incremental. It's 1 or 2 at a time. Slow process.
I think that's likely to be the case for, with ADUs, because it will take a lot of work on the single family owner's part to make that happen. Hopefully they won't have to put in a separate lateral or pay impact fees. Those are going to be key policy questions, I think.
Yeah, and the Workforce Housing Committee will get a chance not only to review any ADU policy, but also just the zoning code as a whole once we have a draft ready to circulate. So that'll be an important opportunity for you all to provide feedback on as well.
Another area, and I'll just throw this out there, another area that is just very intriguing to me is the whole north side of Century Avenue from basically High Road all the way to Parmenter. Obviously on the south side, it's mostly duplexes. And they're generally, well maintained, but the whole north side, drive by that sometime. It's, there might be some opportunity for the city to get involved on that side of the street. Take a look at it sometime.
Which street? High?
Well, on Century, so we're on Century, and on the north side of Century between High Road and basically up to Parmenter there. I mean, there's some homes in there that are in really, really rough shape.
Century Place, maybe?
No, it's probably a little bit just west of that. So on the north side. Well, maybe it's on the east side. Sorry, Century Place. I'm trying to see where Century Place is on that.
Century Place.
That's
is the
that.
one that-
So that would be, it would be to the east of there, kind of that segment, kind of right in there. Yep. There are some properties in there that are really hurting.
It's like there's some really deep lots in that area too.
Are there? I mean, there's one home in there in particular, there's like a dead tree growing in the middle of the house, like right in front of the house. So,
Really?
yeah, I mean, it looks very, very run down, a few of those properties. I'm just, maybe there's some opportunity there. And it's on, it's on Century. So kind of like to the east there, it's maybe not the ideal for, redevelopment, single family home.
But it could be a good area for like a quad of condos, for example.
Yeah. It's in a great area.
Yeah, keep those thinking caps on. This is good.
All right, anything else before we wrap it up for tonight? I think we all have some homework, and it was good to see everybody and reconnect with a meeting here.
Yeah, I'm all set. Thank you.
Do we need a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Motion by Betsy, a second.
I'll second. Oh, sorry, Ben.
Ben,
Yeah.
Ben beat you.
Sorry.
Ben beat you. All right, all in favor of adjourning, indicate by saying aye.
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 All
Aye
right,
and
meeting-
bye.
Thanks,
meeting is
everybody.
adjourned. Great to
Thanks,
see
Ron.
everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.